I can still remember the day that my wife and I brought our oldest son home from the hospital after he was born. We had prayed for a child for years. We had walked through the grief of a miscarriage. We had sat in rooms that felt still and wondered if maybe parenthood was just something somebody else got to experience. And so when he finally arrived, this small, impossible miracle, I couldn't stop staring at him. I remember holding him in the middle of the night thinking, this changes everything. And it did. For a while. But now he's 7 and the tiny baby I couldn't stop staring at has just become a part of the normal rhythm of life. There's school and routines and dinners and it's all just normal. Now the love didn't fade, but something else did. The wonder. That daily awareness that this little life is a gift that I do not deserve and could not have produced on my own. And somewhere between the sleepless nights and the long days and the short years, the extraordinary became ordinary. And if I'm honest with you, I've watched the same thing happen in my faith too. You see, there's this strange thing that happens with familiarity. The more you hear something, the easier it is to carry it without even thinking about it. You believe it, but somewhere along the way you stop feeling it. And the resurrection of Christ is particularly vulnerable to this. You see, most of us, we've heard the story so many times we can run through it without even thinking. We know the sequence, the empty tomb, the folded clothes, the angels, the appearances. We know it. And that knowing creates this distance. Now, not disbelief, just distance. Like the story you're so familiar with rather than the reality that you're living from. And listen, I've stood on many stages and preached the resurrection with full confidence and almost zero personal wonder. Easter comes every year, the music swells, the place fills up, and somewhere in all of that, we've learned to celebrate the resurrection without being confronted by it. And here's why this matters. When the resurrection becomes ordinary, our faith slowly becomes powerless. Not wrong, not gone, just powerless. We still show up, we still believe the right things, but we stopped expecting anything to actually change in our life, in our relationships, in the way that we face hard stuff. And we end up with a faith that's true, but not alive. And that's the danger. Danger's not atheism or walking away, it's just getting used to what used to be extraordinary. And here's what I keep coming back to. The first people who encountered the resurrection were not casual about it. They weren't politely interested. They were stunned. And the reason they were stunned is because they were not expecting it. I would challenge you to go read Luke 24 sometime. Not as some assignment, but just read it as a story. The women, they walked to the tomb early on a Sunday morning carrying these burial spices. And listen, you don't bring embalming supplies to a resurrection. They weren't expecting a miracle. They were simply finishing the story. They came to do what you did when some loved one died, but the story here refused to end. You see, when they got there, the stone was rolled away, the body was gone, and these two figures were standing there in clothes that looked like lightning. And their response? It's not celebration. It was confusion and fear, and they run and they go tell the disciples. And Luke says the disciples thought it sounded like nonsense, like some grief-stricken story that these women made up. But then there's Peter. I love Peter. Peter, who 3 days earlier had looked at a servant girl in the face in Jesus' biggest moment of need and said, I do not know him. And 3 times Peter denied Jesus and then walked away from that fire. And he's now probably spent the last 48 hours convinced that he had burned everything down and there was no coming back from it. And he gets up when he hears this news and he runs to the tomb and he looks inside and he sees the burial clothes just lying there. And he walks away, and Luke says he walks away wondering. Not celebrating, simply wondering. Because the resurrection didn't arrive into a room full of eager believers ready to receive it. It arrived into grief, into doubt, into the despair of people who were pretty sure their story was already over, that they had missed their chance. But good news, it doesn't wait for people to be ready. The tomb was empty before a single person deserved for it to be so. And then something incredible happened to those first followers that's really hard to explain if the resurrection didn't actually happen. You see, days earlier when Jesus was crucified, they scattered. Peter denied him. The rest disappeared while Jesus was arrested. They weren't brave. They weren't holding on strong. They ran like people who believed the story was done. But within weeks, these same people were standing in public, telling anyone who would listen that Jesus had risen from the dead, not whispering it, but proclaiming it, even when that meant it could cost them everything. And here's what you have to reckon with. People don't willingly suffer and die for something they hope is true. They do that for something they're convinced they saw. And these people weren't clinging to some metaphor. They were eyewitnesses who couldn't unsee what they had seen. And what happened next is one of the most remarkable things in human history. You see, these few dozen terrified followers became thousands and then hundreds of thousands, and historians estimate that by the year 300, roughly 10% of the entire Roman Empire claimed to follow Jesus. And it all started with these small handfuls of people who refused to stop talking about what they had seen. And they grew because ordinary people decided to live so differently. They loved so recklessly. They faced death calmly. And they did that so their neighbors could see what Jesus had done for them. You see, they never let the extraordinary become ordinary. They shaped their entire lives around the conviction that the death had been defeated, that forgiveness was real, that the story that God was writing did not end with a grave, which meant fear didn't get to run their lives. It meant that they could love people with absolutely nothing to offer to them, which meant that the unglamorous acts of faithfulness that nobody applauds were actually never wasted. And this small group of followers went on to change the world. And the reason that you and me are here today following Christ, interested in what he has for us, is because of them. Is because they never let the extraordinary become ordinary. And here's where I want to land today. If the resurrection is still true, if the tomb is still empty, then nothing has changed. What has changed is whether we let that reality stay extraordinary or let it become ordinary in our lives. Here's what I want to challenge you with. Stop treating the resurrection like some background information and start treating it like the news it actually is. News that changes how you live, not just sits there in the background. When you wake up tomorrow and the familiar script starts playing, the guilt, the pressure, the sense that you're behind on something that matters, you have a choice. You can run that old script, or you can remember that history turned a corner 2,000 years ago and the world has never been the same place since. Practically, this might look like before the day starts, before it gets ahead of you, before you pick up your phone, before you audit everything you did yesterday and all the things you have to do today, take a few minutes to remind yourself what is actually true. Remind yourself that the story's not over. Remind yourself that the tomb is still empty and you are part of a chain of witnesses that goes all the way back to those women in the garden outside of Jerusalem. It goes back to them of people who have lived the extraordinary faith, the extraordinary reality that Jesus has given them. And the reality is you're here today because somebody told you about Jesus. And they told you because somebody told them. And you can trace that line all the way back to these women carrying the burial spices to the empty tomb that day. And they were expecting a body, but instead they found something extraordinary. And now it's your turn. The question for you is whether you'll let it stay extraordinary or whether you'll settle back into the ordinary. And I would challenge you. If the resurrection is true and I'm willing to stake my life on it, then the story of the world has already changed and so has yours. Don't let the extraordinary become ordinary. Let it shape how you're living today. Thank you so much for watching this video. If it helped you think about the resurrection differently, hit that subscribe button. I put out videos like this every week. And if you want to go deeper on this stuff, I write a weekly newsletter on Substack. It's about theology you can actually use, not academic, and not fluffy. Just stuff that will help you grow in your faith. The link is down in the description down below. And hey, drop a comment down below. I'd love to know what landed hardest for you in this video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.